On a clear December afternoon in 1945, the U.S. Navy launched a routine training mission off the coast of Florida. 5 Avengers, sturdy torpedo bombers, piloted by young men fresh from war. They were experienced, confident, and well-equipped. Yet, within hours, all 5 planes vanished. No distress signal, no wreckage, no survivors. The U.S. Navy sent a massive search operation involving 300 aircraft and ships. Then, one of those rescue planes disappeared too, along with its 13 crew members. 91 pilots in total, gone without a trace. How can men trained for war simply fly into nothingness? How can technology, discipline, and human courage dissolve into silence? For decades, this mystery has been wrapped in legend. The ghost squadron that vanished in what the world now calls the Bermuda Triangle. It's a story that refuses to die because it gnaws at something deeper than conspiracy theories. It touches the fear that even the most powerful nation on Earth cannot always explain its own ghosts. These men weren't explorers chasing myths. They were servicemen of a triumphant empire at the dawn of the atomic age, trained to master the skies. Yet their story feels more medieval than modern, more like sailors swallowed by an angry sea than pilots of a mechanized age. The contradiction is haunting. How can modern warfare, which mapped the heavens and crushed fascism, lose its sons to a patch of ocean that looks peaceful from above? The United States had emerged from World War II as the unrivaled titan of the world. Its factories roared, its scientists conquered physics. Its flag now stretched across oceans. Americans believed in progress, in control, in the idea that the unknown could be tamed. But then came this incident, a fleet of young heroes vanishing without cause. It was like a whisper from nature or fate saying, "You haven't mastered everything yet." For a country still high on victory, that was a terrifying message. Some witnesses reported strange radio transmissions before contact was lost. Voices repeating, "Everything looks wrong. We can't tell which way is west. Even the ocean doesn't look right. Instruments failing, compasses spinning." If you've ever been lost in fog on a highway, you might know the rising panic of direction melting away. Multiply that by altitude, fuel running low, and the open Atlantic below. That's not myth, that's human fear at its most primal. Yet, even fear doesn't explain the total absence of wreckage. The U.S. Navy combed thousands of square miles. Not a wing, not a raft, not an oil slick. How could the largest coordinated search of its time find nothing? To put that in modern terms, imagine losing a passenger jet today, completely, without debris or signal just off the U.S. coastline. The media storm would be endless, the internet ablaze with theories. But in 1945, the world was still processing Hiroshima and the beginning of the nuclear age. Disappearances could still hide behind mystery rather than satellite images. Many people today dismiss the Bermuda Triangle as folklore, lumped with UFOs and lost cities. But for the families of those 91 men, it wasn't folklore. It was a hole in reality. Think about the mothers receiving telegrams that said, "Missing in action, presumed dead." No grave, no goodbye. That's the true horror. Not the supernatural, but the void of not knowing. Every generation has its own unanswered sky. For our grandparents, it was Flight 19. For our parents, maybe Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Different times, same abyss. Humans send their bravest into the air, and sometimes the air swallows them. We trust technology, GPS, radar, autopilot, as if they are gods. But technology can fail, and when it does, the silence feels infinite. The disappearance of the Ghost Squadron didn't just birth a legend, it challenged America's faith in its own mastery. If men could vanish so close to home, what else could go wrong in the age of machines? Newspapers called it the mystery of Flight 19. Preachers called it a warning. Scientists called it coincidence. But deep down, the public felt something ancient stir, an awareness that the unknown still exists, even in a mapped world. Today, when we open flight trackers and watch hundreds of aircraft glowing across our screens in real time, it's easy to believe we've conquered uncertainty. Yet, if you've ever seen a plane icon suddenly disappear from that screen, even for a second, you feel that same flicker of dread, a reminder that the sky is still untamed. Perhaps that's why the story of the Ghost Squadron endures. It's not just about lost pilots. It's about the fragility of human confidence, about how progress blinds us until the ocean takes something back. The mystery of those 91 men lives not in their disappearance, but in what it reveals about us. That we still crave explanations for the things we can't control. And somewhere between Florida and Bermuda, that craving meets silence. As the waves closed over the last signal, the Navy's search crews could only stare into the horizon, listening to static. No wreck, no light, just endless blue. One officer reportedly said, "It's as if they flew into another world." Maybe he was right. Or maybe that other world was simply the realization that mastery of nature is an illusion. In the heart of the American century, the ocean reminded humanity of its limits. And so a story began. A story that still hums beneath the waves of the Atlantic, waiting for answers, or at least remembrance. The wind over Fort Lauderdale carried no sound that day, only questions. Questions that would lead investigators, theorists, and dreamers to one place. A triangle on the map where logic frays and myths are born. And that's where the Ghost Squadron's trail begins, in a training flight that was never meant to history, but did. On December 5, 1945, at exactly 2:10 p.m., 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale under the command of Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, a seasoned pilot with over 2,500 hours of flight experience. The mission was called Navigation Problem Number 1. It was a simple triangular route. Fly east toward the Bahamas, turn north, then back west to Florida. A 3-hour exercise. Nothing dangerous, nothing new. For the 14 men aboard those planes, it was supposed to be just another day in uniform, a test of skill before heading home for Christmas. But that triangle on the map would soon earn a different name, one whispered with unease, the Bermuda Triangle. The weather was calm. The sea glittered like polished glass, and the sun hung low over the Atlantic. Each Avenger carried enough fuel for 5 hours of flight, armed with no live torpedoes, just instruments and training gear. The formation took off smoothly. Radio checks were clear. For the first 40 minutes, everything followed procedure. Then, at 3:40 p.m., something went wrong. The first strange transmission came through. "This is FT-28. Both my compasses are out. I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, but everything looks wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look right." That voice, Taylor's, would become one of the last ever heard. What followed was a slow-motion unraveling of logic and trust. Radio operators on the mainland tried to triangulate their position, but the signals were faint and erratic. Taylor insisted they were over the Florida Keys, hundreds of miles southwest of where they actually were. His trainees, by the manual, should have corrected him. But in military hierarchy, challenging your superior during flight wasn't easy. They followed his lead, deeper into confusion. The ocean below was infinite blue, the horizon a blur. No landmarks, no sun, just haze and instinct. At 4:10 p.m., another pilot radioed, "If we just head west, we'll get home." But Taylor overruled him. He feared turning west might send them into the Gulf of Mexico instead of back to base. To modern ears, it sounds absurd. How could experienced pilots not tell east from west? But over the Atlantic, under overcast skies, magnetic compasses can act like mischievous spirits. Scientists later explained that the Bermuda region lies close to a magnetic anomaly, where true north and magnetic north align unpredictably. Compasses can deviate by several degrees, enough to doom a flight that depends on precise navigation. By 5 p.m., fuel was running low. A storm was forming. The last clear message received was chilling. "We can't make out land. Everything is wrong. It looks like we are entering white water." Then, silence. The sky darkened, and 5 planes disappeared. Not exploded, not crashed in sight, just gone. The Navy launched a search and rescue mission immediately. The first to respond was a PBM Mariner flying boat with 13 crew members, nicknamed the Flying Gas Tank because of its massive fuel load. Within 20 minutes of takeoff, it too vanished. A tanker ship nearby reported seeing a giant fireball fall into the ocean, but no wreckage was ever found. It was as if the Atlantic had decided to erase evidence itself. In the days that followed, more than 300 aircraft and ships combed 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing, not an oil slick, not a fragment of metal, not a single body. The Navy's official report listed the cause as unknown. Behind closed doors, though, officers were baffled. How could a routine mission go so catastrophically wrong? How could compasses fail on 5 separate planes? And why did their training leader, an expert navigator, make decisions that seemed almost suicidal? Some speculated Taylor suffered vertigo, a disorienting condition where the brain loses sense of direction. Others whispered of secret experiments, radar interference, or even time distortions. In the absence of answers, imagination filled the void. To understand why Flight 19 became more than a tragedy, one must see the cultural moment it fell into. America, in late 1945, was on the cusp of peace, but haunted by the shadows of war. The atomic bomb had just redrawn the limits of human power. Soldiers were returning home, changed. The world had seen humanity's capacity for destruction. And now a story appeared about men being taken by something unseen, unexplainable, beyond control. It resonated with an unease people didn't want to name. Maybe we were tampering with forces larger than ourselves. The image of those Avengers, sleek, gray birds slicing into fog, became an icon of post-war anxiety. Journalists called it the flight that flew into oblivion. Novels, radio dramas, and pulp magazines seized it as proof that nature itself held secrets man was never meant to master. For scientists, it became a case study in navigational failure. For mystics, it was proof of interdimensional rifts. For the grieving families, it was neither. It was just silence. Even decades later, when divers and sonar teams scoured the ocean floor with modern equipment, they found dozens of wrecked Avengers, but none matched the serial numbers of Flight 19. That small, maddening detail keeps the legend alive. Maybe the ocean did take them. Maybe they're still down there, under miles of pressure and dark, their wings folded in eternal formation. Or maybe the real story is simpler and sadder, that human error, compounded by weather and pride, turned 5 training planes into a ghost story. Yet the emotional gravity of Flight 19 endures because it mirrors the paradox of progress. The smarter we become, the more mysterious the world seems. We build machines to dominate the elements, only to realize the elements are patient. They can wait 1,000 years to remind us who's really in control. The Atlantic doesn't care about logbooks or medals. It only remembers echoes. And those echoes didn't fade. They multiplied. As the headlines spread, Navy training flight lost. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle began to form, fed by fear, wonder, and an unspoken belief that some places on Earth are not meant to be crossed. The disappearance of Flight 19 was no longer just a military mishap. It became a doorway into one of the 20th century's strangest modern myths, a riddle that would pull in scientists, skeptics, and storytellers for generations to come, all asking the same question: what really happened out there? And why does that part of the sea still refuse to tell? By the 1950s, the story of Flight 19 had already slipped from the headlines into the realm of legend. It was no longer just about a squadron that disappeared. It was about a part of the map that seemed to swallow anything daring to cross it. Writers began calling it the Devil's Triangle. The term Bermuda Triangle came later, in 1964, coined by a man named Vincent Gaddis in Argosy magazine. He described it as a zone stretching from Miami to Bermuda to Puerto Rico, where ships and planes vanished under mysterious circumstances. It was perfect for the American imagination, an exotic setting, brave men, and nature playing tricks beyond reason. It sounded like the ocean itself was haunted. But beneath the sensationalism, there were patterns: scientific, psychological, and political. Let's start with magnetism. The Bermuda region sits on one of the few places on Earth where true north and magnetic north align. Navigators call it agonic line drift. In practice, that means compasses can behave erratically, especially during solar storms or geomagnetic shifts. For an aircraft depending entirely on magnetic bearings in 1945, that's a recipe for chaos. Add haze, exhaustion, and a commanding officer convinced he was flying over Florida when he wasn't, and the triangle becomes less demonic, more tragic. Still, magnetism doesn't explain the complete vanishing act, the lack of wreckage, the lost rescue plane, or the later incidents that seemed to echo Flight 19's fate. Over the next few decades, ships like the USS Cyclops, Marine Sulphur Queen, and aircraft like the Star Tiger and Star Ariel would also vanish without distress calls. Each disappearance layered new mystery onto the map, creating a legend thick enough to obscure reason. It was like the ocean itself had a brand, and business was booming. Skeptics argue that statistics flatten the myth. Thousands of vessels cross the Bermuda Triangle every year. The rate of disappearances, they say, is no higher than anywhere else. Human error, sudden squalls, mechanical failure, all explainable. But the problem with rational explanations is that they don't satisfy emotional questions. The Bermuda Triangle isn't just about what happened, it's about what we need it to mean. It's a mirror of our relationship with mystery. Americans of the post-war era, raised on science, modernity, and control, needed a place on the map where control didn't apply. The triangle became that place, a geographical confession that even empires have blind spots. Then came the Cold War, and the ocean grew even more secretive. The U.S. Navy filled the Atlantic with radar experiments, submarine cables, and classified testing zones. Some theorists whispered that Flight 19 had flown into a military field experiment gone wrong, a radar blackout perhaps, or a magnetic weapons test. It's an alluring theory because it feeds both paranoia and patriotism, the idea that the truth was hidden not by aliens, but by our own government in the name of security. For a nation discovering both nuclear power and televised conspiracy, that idea was irresistible. Hollywood took notice. By the 1970s, the Bermuda Triangle had become a cultural shorthand for the unknown. Books like Charles Berlitz's The Bermuda Triangle turned pseudoscience into bestsellers. TV specials claimed UFO abductions, time portals, even remnants of Atlantis beneath the waves. One popular tale suggested that the triangle was a rip in the fabric of time, a place where past and present blurred. That story caught fire not because people truly believed it, but because they wanted to believe something bigger than chance. After all, randomness is terrifying. Fate, even if it's cosmic or mystical, feels more merciful. Yet, among all the theories, aliens, sea monsters, rogue waves, there's one that feels both mundane and profound: methane. Deep under the seafloor, massive pockets of methane hydrate can destabilize and erupt, turning seawater into a frothing, air-saturated mess. Ships lose buoyancy and sink almost instantly. For aircraft, the gas could cause engine failure or confuse radar. It's science, but it sounds like magic. And that's the power of the triangle. It blurs the boundary between the rational and the supernatural until they become the same story told in different languages. Psychologists have another angle. They call it pattern hunger, the human need to connect unconnected events into coherent stories. When we look at a random scatter of stars and see constellations, or a patch of ocean and see a curse, that's pattern hunger. Flight 19 wasn't the first or last tragedy over water, but it became a focal point because it happened at the right moment, when America's optimism collided with its growing unease. The war had ended, but uncertainty had not. People wanted to believe the universe had rules, even strange ones. A triangle that devoured planes was easier to accept than a godless chaos where good men simply vanish. Interestingly, the Bermuda Triangle's fame rose in direct proportion to our technological arrogance. The more we mapped the seas, the more we wanted there to be a spot that couldn't be mapped. The more we trusted radar, satellites, and autopilot, the more thrilling it became to imagine them failing. The myth survives because it offers a paradox we secretly enjoy. The idea that, no matter how powerful we become, there will always be something out there laughing quietly at our confidence. Even today, pilots flying over that stretch of ocean sometimes glance down at their instruments with an extra flicker of superstition. Rationally, they know it's just another patch of sky. But deep in the human brain, somewhere older than reason, lingers a whisper: don't get too sure of yourself. The Bermuda Triangle is not a place so much as an idea. It's the ghost of every unanswered call, every blinking radar screen that goes dark. It's the space between certainty and fear,
science and story, where both lose their edges. And it's there, between magnetic fields and military secrets, between myth and memory, that the truth of Flight 19 still drifts. The Navy's reports would one day declassify certain findings, but not all. Some documents were marked restricted, others lost entirely. Whether by accident or design, that vacuum of knowledge ensured one thing: the legend would live forever. And so, from a handful of missing planes, an empire of mystery was born, one that still challenges our belief in what the map can truly tell us.
In the months following Flight 19's disappearance, the United States Navy faced a dilemma deeper than the Atlantic itself. The war had just ended, the nation was basking in triumph, and the armed forces were symbols of competence and order. Yet here was an incident that defied both. 5 planes and a rescue crew had vanished within sight of home. The official investigation took months, producing a report that seemed less like a document of answers and more like a collection of doubts. Cause unknown, it concluded. That single word, unknown, was both a shield and a confession. It protected the Navy from blame, but it also admitted something Americans weren't used to hearing: that even their military, the mightiest on Earth, could be baffled by nature. Inside those classified files were contradictions that read like a ghost story written by engineers. Witnesses reported perfect weather and clear visibility, yet radio logs mentioned storms. Flight logs were missing or smudged. Lieutenant Taylor, the commander, had complained of faulty instruments even before takeoff, but his plane hadn't been replaced. Some mechanics later said the compasses were overdue for recalibration. There were rumors, too, of experimental radar interference tests occurring in the same area that afternoon, part of the Navy's early research into electromagnetic detection. If that was true, it meant Flight 19 might have flown through a pocket of man-made confusion, a storm of static created not by the sea, but by science. The official record, however, never confirmed it. It's easier to fight ghosts than bureaucracy. The families of the missing men demanded explanations, but the Navy's letters were coldly formal. No remains recovered, no wreckage identified, presumed lost at sea. That phrase became a collective tombstone, written on paper instead of stone. One mother from New Jersey wrote back, "How can the sea keep my son and give no answer?" Her letter, buried in the National Archives, never received a reply. To the Navy, this was an operational anomaly. To the public, it was a supernatural event. The divide between the two became the heart of the legend. But beneath the folklore, something else was brewing, an undercurrent of fear that the ocean itself was a battlefield the U.S. couldn't fully control. The Cold War had begun. Submarines prowled the depths with nuclear weapons. Radar towers blinked across the coastlines like sentinels. And in this new war of invisibility, the idea of machines vanishing into thin air hit too close to home. Every American family now lived under the shadow of new invisible forces: radiation, espionage, global tension. Flight 19's mystery became a metaphor for that fear, that the very technologies meant to protect us could also erase us. Even within military circles, some officers whispered doubts. An internal memo, declassified decades later, suggested the possibility that Taylor had flown hundreds of miles off course, toward open Atlantic. But others doubted such incompetence. It's statistically improbable for 5 aircraft to vanish simultaneously without trace, one analyst wrote. Something more occurred here, something beyond navigational error. That line, brief and vague, became fuel for decades of speculation. Was something more a reference to secret testing, radar jamming, or simply an acknowledgement that they didn't know? The ambiguity became its own mythology. Journalists began asking sharper questions. Why were key radio recordings missing from the public report? Why did the Navy classify certain communications for nearly 30 years? Why did witnesses who claimed to have seen explosions at sea later withdraw their statements? Each question deepened the silence. The public imagination filled it with whatever suited the mood of the times. Aliens during the 1950s, psychic forces in the 1960s, and government cover-ups in the cynical 1970s. The truth, if it still existed, was buried under layers of belief. The irony is that the Navy, trying to suppress panic, ended up feeding it. The more they withheld, the louder the legend grew. The Bermuda Triangle became a pop cultural phenomenon. Books, films, documentaries, each claiming to uncover the truth, each reinventing the story for a new generation. By the 1980s, even military officers were fielding questions from late-night talk shows about energy vortices and parallel dimensions. Science was losing ground to storytelling, and storytelling was winning because it understood something the Navy didn't. Humans crave meaning more than certainty. And yet, a few stubborn facts remain. The TBM Avenger had a known design flaw. Its carburetor could flood under certain conditions, especially during sharp climbs. A simultaneous mechanical failure could have forced all planes to ditch at sea within minutes of each other. The Mariner rescue plane that followed them carried 2,000 gallons of fuel vapor and had a reputation for exploding mid-flight. The tanker that reported a fireball may have seen just that, a rescue craft destroyed by its own volatility. Rational explanations exist. They simply lack poetry, and humans prefer poetry, especially when the alternative is bureaucracy. Still, when veterans of the Navy's search missions were interviewed years later, some spoke in hushed tones. They described eerie radio echoes, fragments of voices that seemed to repeat transmissions long after they should have ended. One radio man recalled, "It was like hearing ghosts trying to finish their sentences." That detail, unverifiable yet unforgettable, became part of the oral mythos of Flight 19. If the Bermuda Triangle was the theater, the U.S. Navy was both its playwright and its reluctant actor. Their silence gave the mystery form. Their credibility gave it weight. And somewhere in that silence lies a truth Americans instinctively recognized, that power and knowledge have limits, and that even the most advanced civilization can still lose men to the dark. The sea, after all, keeps its own secrets. It doesn't care about reputation or rank. For the families, the Navy's final report was a door closing. For the rest of the world, it was a door left tantalizingly ajar. And through that door came every theory, every whisper, every retelling, each one echoing the same fear that began on that December afternoon, that sometimes, no matter how many instruments we build, we are still flying blind. Those echoes have never stopped. They live in the hum of radar screens, in the static of black boxes, in every pilot's quiet moment when the compass flickers. The Navy might have closed the file, but the question remained open, floating just above the waves, waiting for another voice to answer. 80 years have passed since Flight 19 vanished, yet the Atlantic still holds its silence. No wreckage, no bodies, no clear conclusion, only a story that refuses to die. The Ghost Squadron has become more than a naval mystery. It's a reflection of how we Americans wrestle with the unknowable. Every generation rediscovers Flight 19 and projects its own fears onto it. In the 1950s, it was Cold War paranoia. In the 1970s, it was New Age mysticism. Today, it's digital anxiety, the idea that even with all our data, satellites, and real-time tracking, we can still lose something, or someone, completely. The Bermuda Triangle is no longer just a stretch of ocean. It's a metaphor for the gap between what we can measure and what we can understand. Consider the irony. We've landed probes on Mars, mapped the human genome, and invented machines that can predict storms before they form. Yet the final resting place of 5 World War II bombers and 91 trained servicemen remains a mystery a few hundred miles from Miami Beach. How is that possible? Because the ocean doesn't play by our rules. It moves, reshapes, hides. A wreck that sank in 1945 could now be buried under layers of sand, coral, and centuries of sediment. The Atlantic is a graveyard that constantly rewrites its own map. We think of technology as a lens that sharpens truth, but sometimes it just magnifies our blindness. The legend of Flight 19 survived because it speaks to something universal, the human hunger for closure. We crave endings, explanations, patterns that make chaos feel ordered. When none arrive, we invent them. That's what the Bermuda Triangle became, a myth built from fragments of fear, stitched together by imagination. And maybe that's not a bad thing, because myths, unlike reports, survive long enough to teach us something. They remind us that control is an illusion, and that curiosity is both our greatest gift and our most dangerous addiction. For historians, the Ghost Squadron is a cautionary tale of arrogance. The U.S. Navy in 1945 believed it could outthink nature, that with enough charts and radios, no pilot could ever get lost again. That belief was shattered within hours. For scientists, it's a lesson in probability and chaos. For storytellers, it's a reminder that the unknown isn't the enemy, it's the fuel. And for the rest of us, it's a mirror held up to our own age of uncertainty. When a server crashes, when a signal drops, when a drone disappears from radar, we feel the same ancient panic that those pilots must have felt as their compasses spun wildly. In that instant, we are all flying blind over an invisible sea. But beyond the science and the superstition lies something quieter, more human: remembrance. 91 men, most in their early 20s, vanished before they could grow old. They weren't characters in a legend or symbols of mystery. They were sons, brothers, and friends. Some had written letters home the morning they took off, promising to visit family for Christmas. Those letters arrived. They didn't. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle may have stolen their story, but every time it's told, their names are spoken again. Perhaps that's a kind of resurrection, a reminder that even in mystery, memory endures. Every December, near Fort Lauderdale, veterans and historians gather by the sea. They read the names of Flight 19 aloud, one by one, against the roar of the surf. The ceremony isn't about ghosts or conspiracy. It's about humility. The crowd watches the horizon, where sky meets water, and for a moment, no one speaks. It's as if the ocean itself listens. And somewhere out there, maybe beneath miles of shifting sand, 5 planes rest in silence, holding their story tighter than any archive ever could. In the end, what the Bermuda Triangle teaches us is not that the world is haunted, but that it's vast, and we are small. Our instruments can guide us only so far. The rest is faith, intuition, and luck. Flight 19 disappeared at the intersection of confidence and chaos, where technology met the timeless power of nature. That intersection still exists every time we lift off the ground or dive beneath the waves. It's a reminder that exploration always carries risk, and that mystery, far from being our enemy, is what keeps us reaching. So the next time you fly over the Atlantic, look out the window. See that endless blue. Somewhere beneath it lies the legacy of those who dared the unknown and never returned. Their story isn't about fear, it's about the price of wonder. The Ghost Squadron didn't just vanish, it became part of the sea's memory, part of the eternal dialogue between humankind and the world it's trying to understand. And if this story has kept you awake, questioning, imagining, then maybe they haven't vanished at all. Maybe they've simply found a new flight path through the currents of history and curiosity, leading us to keep asking questions we may never answer. Because that, in the end, is the real mystery. Not what happened to Flight 19, but why we can't stop looking for them. If you believe some stories deserve to stay alive, then keep this one alive with you. Share it, question it, remember it. And if the wind ever carries the sound of distant engines over the Atlantic, listen closely. You might just hear the echoes of the Ghost Squadron, still flying somewhere between fact and faith. Subscribe for more forgotten histories, because the past, like the sea, still hides more than it reveals.